As we have entered the Renaissance period, we've been discussing the development of what we call academic equitation. Naples is the birthplace, as we have discussed with academies, where European nobility sent their sons to be educated in the arts required for nobility, for the purpose of this video, riding. The first European book on systematic training of horses for work in war or manege was thought to be Grison and his book Gli Ordini di Cavalcare, or The Rules of Riding, published in 1550. He had started a riding academy in Naples in 1532 and had great success with his book, which was popular throughout Europe and is in print to this day. He had great influence as a horseman and educator of horsemen, as his methods were spread into France by Giovanni Battista Pignatelli and his pupils Salomon de la Brue and Antoine de Pluvinel. His book was known as the first riding book since Xenophon, published in 440 BCE. In fact, however, in 1820, when José Xavier Diaz da Silva was digging around in the Royal Library of Paris, he discovered a large in-folio volume that contained an equestrian treatise written more than a century before the Book of Grison. It was written by Dom Duarte, the 11th King of Portugal and Algarve, and the 2nd Lord of Ceuta. He was called the Eloquent or the Philosopher. His work is known as Livro de Ensinança de Bem Cavalgar toda Sella, or The Art of Riding with Any Kind of Saddle. It's not known exactly when he wrote the book, but he died of a plague in 1438. He had only covered 7 of the 16 themes he proposed to cover before his death. For this reason, it was a much quieter publication than Grisoni. It was in manuscript form, incomplete and a few years before the Gutenberg printing press. He wrote a treatise known as O Leal Consejero, the Loyal Counselor, for the education of princes based on his personal experiences, which was found bound together with his Art of Riding in the Royal Library of Paris. His book on riding also represents his personal experiences as a warrior, jouster, hunter, all on horseback. In his opening pages, he writes about riding. To those that say this art does not need a book to be learned, that this is true. But I believe the vast majority will find it beneficial to read everything that I write, because I do not know anyone else who has written about this subject. As far as we know, this is true at least for 1,000 years. I am sure that all the knights and squires should want very strongly to excel in the art of riding, he adds. We are not quite yet in the time of development of manege riding as a sort of art for art's sake, but the focus of mounted training was martial. He does, however, anticipate Renaissance ideas about unity of body and soul, and advocates for mental preparation and self-awareness as a way to master riding. While reading the book, translated into very readable style by Antonio Prado, I kept thinking about a more modern book written some 536 years later, The Inner Game of Tennis by Timothy Galway. Both believed that true mastery begins not on a horse or tennis court, but in the mind. It had been said that Dom Duarte's treatise is particularly notable for its pioneering focus on the psychology of the rider and its compassionate approach to horse training. This has been recognized in the beautiful definition given by the Portuguese scholar Carlos Henriques Pereira, the first page in history of psychology applied to equestrian sports, and probably of sports pedagogy in general. Galway's book brought these sports psychology concepts into the modern mainstream awareness. The book's success helped establish the popular understanding of sports psychology and paved the way for the field's growth in both academic and applied settings. It was one of the most important early works in making sports psychology widely known and accepted. I'd like to compare the two authors' similarities, and then we can look at some of the more horse-specific or riding-specific aspects of Duarte's work. Both writers deal with fear. In Duarte's work, fear is real. His instruction is for riders that go to war, joust, and hunt wild game, all causes for fear beyond the fear of riding. These fears include falling off, horse falling, losing control of the horse. As a result, fear management is a central theme of the book. Dom Duarte, writing in the 1430s, understood fear intimately, not just as a battlefield hazard, but as a psychological barrier to grace, courage, and control. He wrote, "Many men who know how to ride well fail because of fear." He believed that fear paralyzes riders, affecting their balance and ability to use their strengths. As anyone who teaches riding knows, fear does exactly those things and at a different, higher level of tension for competition riders. Fearful riders, even if they are strong, aren't flexible enough to keep their balance on a moving horse. Fearful riders, of course, also transmit internal tension to the horse, and a physical tightness that has negative effect on both horse and rider. In Galway's book, fear comes more from their conscious minds creating tension, overthinking, and self-judgment that disrupts their natural coordination and learning processes. Like the tension inherent in the rider's body, that tension can distort outcomes because it results in tightness, lack of ease. He relates, a player whose conscious mind demands things of the unconscious may cause a tension, for example, in the wrist, that could change the trajectory of the ball. He, of course, is dealing with fear involving learning skills and then displaying those skills in the form of competition. Fear of failing, of looking bad, being defeated. These tensions take place in the mind of the player, but have outward or physical ramifications. As the rider has to guard against tension that could transmit tension to the horse, the tennis player has to control such obstacles to success, such as lapses in concentration, nervousness, self-doubt, and self-condemnation, manifest itself in loss of physical control. For both riders, the goal is to overcome fear and the habits which inhibit excellence. They advise using a focus that takes the person to a calmness. The physical manifestations for the rider and the player would be the same. Allowing fear to control the rider's thought and nervous system creates tensions and muscle weakness, and like a self-fulfilling prophecy, the self-recrimination tennis player is doing the same damage in the moment to fine motor control that the fearful rider is doing. Dom Duarte uses a form of mental control or discipline to deal with fear of being injured and with not looking good in the same way that could be called fake it until you make it. A unique aspect of Duarte's self-control advice is the concept of artful displays or dissimulation. He suggests that a rider should hide insecurity and dissimulate fear by appearing calm and at ease, even in difficult situations, such as calmly adjusting one's clothing when a horse rears. He advises that you converse with people around you, and if the horse is fierce and plunging and turning, keep up your conversation. And if someone who you are talking to is on the ground, even lean towards them to show that you are calm, well-seated, and in no danger. The belief behind this is that appearing confident can lead to actually becoming confident. If you make others believe you are good at it, chances are that you really become good at it in the end. This is strikingly similar to cognitive restructuring techniques in sports psychology, where changing outward behavior or self-talk can influence internal states and foster genuine belief. It also touches on mental toughness, where an athlete maintains composure and a positive outward demeanor even when facing internal distress. Both writers use ideas of judgment versus observation. Duarte didn't use Galway's terminology, but his advice is strikingly modern. He urged writers to observe their own reactions, to learn from experience rather than berate themselves. He wanted writers to observe and practice. In writing, like in all the things we want to do, if fear makes us unable to do it well, we should, first of all, learn how to do it better. Have the ability to stay tall and centered on the horse. Although it's commonly said that we cannot change our nature, I believe that men can reform themselves immensely under God, correcting their shortcomings and increasing their virtues, and everyone should work hard to know himself better, maintaining and increasing the good virtues received and reducing his failures and correcting his shortcomings. This isn't just moralizing, it's a call to introspection and inspection. Duarte is urging writers to become students of their own reactions, to notice fear, tension, pride, and hesitation, and to treat these not as fixed traits but as malleable through conscious effort and experience. In writing, like in all the things we want to do, if fear makes us unable to do it well, we should, first of all, learn how to do it better. And if we know how to do it well, we will have the aforementioned presumption, which in itself normally causes most or all the fear to vanish. This is a clear endorsement of experiential learning. He's saying that competence breeds confidence, and that the path to overcoming fear is through deliberate practice and reflection. Galway calls this non-judgmental awareness, the art of seeing what is, without labeling it good or bad. Galway's insight about awareness and skill development creates a powerful feedback loop that naturally diminishes the inner critic's influence. When we develop genuine awareness, the kind that observes without judgment, we begin to see our actual performance rather than our fears or expectations about it. This awareness-based approach works because it shifts attention away from one's constant commentary toward direct sensory experience. Instead of thinking, I always miss this shot or my backhand is terrible, focused awareness notices specific details: the ball's spin, the feeling of contact, the rhythm of movement. This immediate, present moment focus leaves little mental space for the critic's narrative. Galway wants the player to be in the here and now. Focus on breathing or on the sound of the ball hitting the racket rather than conversing with the conscious self about the future or the past. Very much like Duarte's advice on the rearing and plunging horse, smooth out your clothes. Shift your focus to calmness, even if you're faking it. As skill develops through this aware practice, confidence grows organically from actual experience rather than positive self-talk or forced optimism. The inner critic loses credibility because reality consistently contradicts its negative predictions. When you've successfully executed a shot dozens of times through relaxed awareness, self 1S, the conscious mind, protests that you can't do this, become obviously false. The process becomes self-reinforcing. Better awareness leads to more natural learning, which builds real competence, which further quiets doubt. Each cycle of aware practice creates evidence that the body's intelligence can be trusted, gradually eroding the critic's authority. Duarte believed that confidence came from repetition and familiarity. The body learns through doing. Duarte emphasizes that there is no shortcut to confidence and skill. One, just have to keep practicing with these principles in mind. This foundational advice is a cornerstone of motor learning and performance enhancement in sports psychology, highlighting the necessity of consistent and mindful practice for mastery. The book by Malcolm Gladwell, Outliers, in which he explores what it takes to achieve mastery, cites research by K. Anders Ericsson. Research emphasized that not all practice is equal. What matters is deliberate practice. Duarte uses the term reflective practice to achieve mastery. Anders Ericsson suggests that deliberate practice means practicing with specific goals and getting immediate feedback sought, that execution can be adjusted and technique can be constantly refined. He also suggests that one works just beyond one's current ability. Galway agrees. Once the body knows the motion, the mind must step back and let it happen. To let the intuitive self perform, the player has to let go of judgment. What I mean by judgment is the act of assigning a negative or positive value to an event. He says, letting go of judgments does not mean ignoring errors. It simply means seeing events as they are and not adding anything to them. And here's the point for the rider or the player. Judgment results in tightness, and tightness interferes with the fluidity required for accurate and quick movement. Relaxation produces smooth strokes and results from accepting your strokes as they are, even if erratic. The first step is to see your strokes as they are. They must be perceived clearly. If your body knows how to hit a forehand, then just let it happen. If it doesn't, then let it learn. Both thinkers teach us that mastery is not forced. It's allowed. It's the quieting of the ego so that skill can speak. For Duarte, riding well was more than technique. It was a reflection of virtue, of noble character. Riding, for Duarte, was more than just a sport or recreational activity. It was a way of cultivating the soul and an opportunity for personal growth, combining physical perfection with the education of the spirit. Galway, though less overtly moral, still saw sport as a path to self-realization. Excellence in both cases is the fruit of inner harmony. Galway stresses that the inner game's ideas are not limited to tennis. You can apply them in any area of life where you face challenges, seek to improve your skills, and strive for excellence. He emphasizes the universal importance of cultivating inner calmness amidst external pressures and distractions. Galway argues that developing inner stability, maintaining composure and focus amidst chaos, is essential for navigating these challenges and enjoying a fulfilling life. He emphasizes the importance of distinguishing between what your ego mind demands, your first self, and the true needs of your natural self, your inner being. Often, he says, we feel pressured to meet outside standards that don't align with our authentic desires. This mismatch creates inner conflict and stress, draining our energy and diminishing our sense of well-being. The player of the inner game comes to value the art of relaxed concentration above all other skills. He discovers a true basis for self-confidence, and he learns that the secret to winning any game lies in not trying too hard. The most important skill the player needs to develop to win the inner game is relaxed concentration. Dom Duarte also discusses the role of will. He makes example of the rider whose body is not as perfectly adapted to riding as someone else, but has the will to improve themselves they can. In my opinion, there are more who are unable to be knowledgeable and skilled in a certain area or activity due to their lack of a strong will than the ones who cannot achieve it just due to physical limitations. You may know from your own riding experience or any facet of life, it is the will, not the talent, that really gets the job done. There are riding technique topics that he discussed throughout the manuscript, just as there are tennis-specific exercises in the inner game. Number 1 in a list of 16 in Duarte's book, in which he says is most important of all, is to stay firmly mounted on the beast, no matter what might happen to you. Being firmly mounted means being in the center of the saddle and the center of the horse. He wants the rider to be wise in everything the rider does while riding. He advises that the rider be elegant on the saddle and to know how to correct oneself and the horse while riding to stay centered. He advises the rider to be aware of and keep your skills, not falling into disordered behavior or due to lack of will to keep learning. He urges the rider to be self-aware of their skills based on experience and knowledge of general principles. He then discusses the subject that is the title of the book, How to Ride in Every Saddle. He names 5 styles: two labrida, with the stirrups long and leg straight down, or with leg in front. This is the style we associate with knights and jousting and heavy cavalry, and it is designed to give and receive shock. I did a segment on this when I discussed labrida and la gineta a couple of videos ago. Rather than add to the length of this video, I've released a short video from that previous one called Dom Duarte's 5 Styles of Horseback Riding. He feels every rider should become accomplished in these forms of riding. He gives advice on the training of young riders. They should ride nice horses with no bad habits or malice and have good and appropriate tack. The rider should not be reprimanded for error, but encouraged into good habits and gradually learn how to develop a well-balanced position. If he loses balance and falls or do anything contrary to the art of good riding, he should know that the person instructing understands that these things happen, and the student is encouraged to go on. To ride quite often and develop the difficult skills necessary to be a good horseman. He should progress to cantering and jumping small logs and sticks and learn to do it correctly before going on to galloping and jumping in varied terrain. Initially, he should ride the same horse to learn on and become comfortable with. Duarte's method is to reduce and eliminate fear and to develop confidence. The young horseman goes on to start riding varied and more difficult horses, take more risk in riding outdoors, and finally start carrying and training with weapons. He becomes a complete horseman. The developed rider should show a physical tranquility, a stillness of position that we still admire today. While trotting or cantering, the position is smooth and still. If the beast gets wild, the position should stay stable and still, not even allowing tension to creep into the face. 100 years after this was written, Castiglione's book, The Book of the Courtier, that tension is never shown, and a studied relaxation or sprezzatura is always maintained. Body positions, according to Duarte, should be safe and harmonious even when throwing weapons. He suggests that riding with toe up and heel down allows the joints of the rider's lower leg and ankle to act as shock absorbers that permit stillness in the upper body. The book then starts focusing on martial concerns. There are ways to carry a spear when around brush on the ground or low-hanging branches with leaves on them, and other practical concerns around the weight and length of spears or lances. From these matters, he discusses proper jousting methods. He sees knights jousting who use the spurs on the entire approach to the opponent and feels this is faulty as all that leg movement is destabilizing, and suggests that spurs are only used twice. These 2 moments are at the beginning of the run to get the horse in proper galloping speed, and just moments before impact to sustain speed. He does not use our language, but he describes the concept that the rider keeps the horse in front of the seat and leg through stability, and is then secure and elegant in the approach to the opponent and stable when the impact occurs. He feels that it is of great importance that the rider keeps mental and visual focus on where he is going to impact the shield of his jousting opponent, like Galway advising, watching how the seams of the ball spin as it approaches to focus concentration. Duarte feels the jouster should not close his eyes or veer the visual attention away from the point of impact, or the strike will not have the desired solidity. I enjoyed his description of coaches and spotters along the length of the jousting run that would help their knight assess good or negative qualities of the approach and impact in the post-joust conversations. He states that very few jousters accurately understand their own strengths or weaknesses, so the conversation with the spotter afterwards can tell them the truth of what really happened. I'm trying to not go on too much about the jousting, but I've stood outside of lots of horse show rings to try to assess what happened with my rider in that class, so I kind of get a kick out of reading about the same thing from so long ago. He names a couple of standard reasons why things did not go well out there in the stadium. 1. They really don't want to meet that opponent. 2nd, they are stiff with fear, and so they are very uncomfortable at the moment of collision. 3rd, because they move their bodies and spears too much, being anxious about the collision. 4th, because they always want to have advantage over the other jouster, and as a consequence of it, they make mistakes. He doesn't want you messing around with tricks. He wants you to have prepared well, and then as a result of good preparation, perform well. All those reasons for failure make sense, and he wants assessment and correction of these problems to achieve more success against opponents. For the second reason, that the rider is stiff with fear, he gives the same analysis that Galway says of players who get stiff. The jouster will make too much tension and stiffness in his arm, divert the lance away to some degree of the target promoting failure. The tennis player, for fear of losing or looking bad, can create a stiffness in the arm or wrist that changes the angle of the racket head, thereby getting an unexpected trajectory of the ball. Duarte wants riders to find correct examples and advice and practice. If you practice the techniques and maintain the will, desire, and focus, you will not miss the collision. Much of the rest of the treatise is proper techniques and theory for wounding while hunting animals or in battle. He discusses wounding techniques with spear and sword, techniques for throwing the spear or holding the spear, and why and when of such methods. When throwing a spear at a gallop, for instance, he says you can throw it at least 1/3 longer distance than when throwing it from on foot. The greater force from the speed of the horse also increases the wound from a sword from horseback. He does get a sense that the times are changing and, in his opinion, not for the better. He feels that the men of his time are unduly influenced by the women and are favoring other things such as wearing smart and elegant clothes and shoes, singing and dancing, and not maintaining their interest and training in the martial arts which they one mastered. The knight of his time doesn't train in the arts that require strength, quickness, deftness, and strong arms as they did in his father's reign. He feels some of the current training is good, but what matters is the training for combat, as that is what matters most. Wrestling, fencing, hunting on horseback, jousting are necessary skills. He feels knights are not as physically fit as they once were and should train more. I'll stop with one of his thoughts on daily training. The knight must be able to mount the horse by jumping up on his back from the ground. He should do this training in all sorts of attire, but includes jumping up into the saddle and off in full armor.